So, there we have it, everyone. The UK Supreme Court have now ruled against prorogation of Parliament and Boris Johnson's government to suspend the session. Now, Remainers are very excited. They're out there celebrating, thinking, that's it, they've done it. But in reality, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed.
The Court is bound to conclude, therefore, that the decision to advise Her Majesty to prorogue Parliament was unlawful because it had the effect of frustrating or preventing the ability of Parliament to carry out its constitutional functions without reasonable justification.
Now, firstly, the biggest thing to remember is that Jeremy Corbyn and Remain MPs are going out there saying that it's now been proven that Boris Johnson has lied to the Queen, so he has to resign. Now, for the record, the verdict clarified that it didn't say anything about lying. It just basically said that there was no reason to prorogue, so prorogation never actually happened. No mention of lying. Now, in terms of the Supreme Court themselves, obviously, whilst we respect the rule of law and the judiciary, you can still criticize the system. As we have always done, case by case, we've seen individuals where the verdict is wrong, and that's always been the case. And there's nothing wrong with it. Doesn't mean we now suddenly don't respect the judicial system. On the other hand, it is not their job to get political. It wasn't their responsibility to get involved in this way. The verdict went way too far. It not only said it's not prorogued, it wasn't wrong to prorogue, but it also said that basically Parliament should come back. It's not up to you to decide what the Speaker should do. Now, currently, Remainer MPs and the opposition are out there in Westminster on the streets shouting and screaming, saying that Boris Johnson lied, so he has to resign. Now, there's absolutely no need for Boris Johnson to resign. Just don't do it. It will be a very, very stupid idea. All he has to do is to go out there and say that we only suspended Parliament because Parliament suspended democracy. Now, the next move is that UK Supreme Court gave power to John Bercow, the Speaker of the House of Commons, to decide, and John Bercow, obviously as a Remainer, has recalled Parliament.
I have instructed the House authorities to prepare not for the recall, the prorogation was unlawful and is void, to prepare for the resumption of the business of the House of Commons. Specifically, I've instructed the House authorities to undertake such steps as are necessary to ensure that the House of Commons sits tomorrow and that it does so at 11:30 a.m.
Now, before Remainers get excited over the opportunities that they have just because they got a few extra days, these people have had over 3 years to, if they wanted to completely stop Brexit or do something productive, and they haven't been able to do it. If they think they can do it within the next few days, good luck with that. They basically have three reasonable options. One is to revoke Article 50 and completely cancel Brexit. Now, the problem with that is that there's no majority in the House of Commons for that option. The Labour Party will not do it. It's primarily the Liberal Democrats. Even some of the other Remainers in the Change UK and the independent Remainers are also against revoking Article 50. They want a second referendum. They are obsessed with this idea of it's their version of the will of the people. We have to have a second referendum. We can't just completely revoke Article 50. So that option, it's quite tough. Second option is to call a general election, what Boris Johnson wanted to do a few weeks ago. Now, Jeremy Corbyn and the rest of the Labour Party are still in Brighton at their party conference, and Corbyn just made a speech saying that, yes, Boris should resign and we should have an election. Now, this is why you should not get overexcited. I'm talking to Jeremy Corbyn, because you've now just said it. You have to vote for it. And I still fear that if Boris Johnson asks to call for an election, a lot of people, including Corbyn, would not really vote for it. But the reason is that if they do vote for an election, Parliament will be suspended. And that's another problem for the Remainers. If they do that, then they will lose control of the parliamentary timetable. But another option for them is to call for a vote of no confidence in Boris Johnson's government. Now, obviously, if they win that vote, there's the period of the 14 days for the opposition to get themselves together, and there's a problem because they still don't want Jeremy Corbyn to be the interim leader. And once that's done, then there's going to be an election anyway. So that's also a similar outcome. So all the three options are currently bad ideas for the Remainer MPs. Now, there's only one real option that Remainers could have, but I'm not going to actually mention this in this video. I don't want to give anyone any idea, but there is only one way that we could say about 25% chance of succeeding. But that requires them to be fully united in the House of Commons, and again, I'm not going to mention this today. Now, going back to Boris Johnson, he clearly doesn't need to apologise, because all he has to do is go out there and say, well, technically we didn't know the new rules because there's no precedent. Until now, when you prorogue Parliament to have a Queen's speech, there was no problem. The Supreme Court made it political, and usually you just don't need the reason. You just say, we want to start a new parliamentary session, and let's just do it anyway. So he doesn't need to do that. All he has to do is now create the new narrative, people versus Parliament. He has to rally all Brexiteers behind him. He has to get everyone together. It is now his job to make sure that people get behind the Prime Minister, regardless of the party or anything else at this point, because if we get divided, then it's not really good for the cause. And when it comes to calling an election, there is also another option for Boris Johnson. The problem is that because of the Fixed Term Parliament Act, you need a 2/3 majority in the House of Commons to get that approved. But what he could do is to do a short bill to essentially put aside the provisions of the Fixed Term Parliament Act. That means if that short bill goes through the House of Lords, then Boris Johnson and the Conservative government can set the date of the election themselves, which means they can basically set the election date for the first week of November, which will then suspend Parliament around the date of the Brexit date, the 31st of October, which means Remainers can't stop Brexit. Now, at this point, Nicola Sturgeon, the leader of the SNP, has now called for a vote of no confidence, so it's now all up to Jeremy Corbyn. Nicola Sturgeon said that a Prime Minister with any honour would tender his resignation. Unthinkable that Johnson would stay on in light of Supreme Court judgment. If he won't do the decent and honourable thing, Parliament should force him out of office through a confidence vote. Now, this is all getting very exciting because all the pressure is now on the Remainers and especially Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. The reason I said earlier in the video that nothing has changed is because at this point, all the options that we talked about are not really workable for Remainers. The only thing they still have is the Ben bill, the bill that's going to force Boris Johnson to ask for an extension. And there are apparently loopholes that they could use to avoid that, but I think at this point it's going to be it has to be a proper maverick to do that. My view is, again, this is not a prediction because I'm not God, I've been told, is that Boris might come back with a deal, which obviously none of us will like, Remainers won't like it, Brexiters won't like it, but that will essentially create a situation where before the 19th of October, any boring and mediocre deal would come through, would fail, and if he has to go back to the European Union because he has to ask for an extension, he will basically make the EU Council to be frustrated and say, you know what, we've tried every way, get out. We don't want to give you any delay. But as we've said before, this is a very, very risky gamble. And this is the whole point of Boris Johnson going around saying he wants a deal, because that's his best backup plan, to use that deal to make that deal lose in the Commons, to go out there and say, hello EU, we tried to pass the deal, they said no, goodbye. That is still a risky gamble, and I think the best way is to basically find another loophole to ignore that, the Ben bill, unless he wants to essentially break the rules again. So let's see how that goes. Well, let's have a look at the reaction of Mike Graham on Talk Radio on this issue.
Well, I'm sorry, Lady Hale. I think you've made a massive blunder. This is not a situation for the courts to sort out. This is indeed a situation for Parliament to sort out once it comes back on October the 14th. They have now risen from their 11-judge decision. And my belief is that this was always going to happen. I did say at the top of this hour, as if I was very good at predicting these things, that they would find it unlawful. And I'll tell you why. Because if they didn't find it unlawful, they would find it very difficult to stop Boris Johnson from doing whatever he's got up his sleeve next. Now it's going to go back to John Bercow, the Speaker of the House, who we all know is a devout Remainer, as indeed it would seem are some of these judges, to basically put it back into his hands to say that he wants to recall Parliament on his own. It's an absolute mess. It's an absolute disgrace. It is, in my view, a prorogation of democracy. The idea that 11 judges can complain about Boris Johnson frustrating the will of Parliament when the will of Parliament has done its very best and level best to frustrate the will of the people for 3 years, I find quite extraordinary. People will not be happy about this. The Remainiacs, of course, will be rejoicing. The barristers, all of the people who are on the side of Remain, who don't want to see us leaving the European Union, will be feeling very happy. But I believe that Boris Johnson will have a plan.
Also, before we continue, I've seen a lot of comments on my channel, and people keep asking, who funds you? We don't know you. Who are you? Are you being paid by the Tories? For the record, no, I am not being paid by the Tory party. I am not linked to the Conservative Party in any shape or form in that way. There's no funding. I'm not some sort of like Remainer to have George Soros behind me. The only way, obviously, I do it full time. I'm a campaigner, I'm an activist, Brexit activist, and I have this YouTube channel which I'll get the funding through YouTube advertising, basically. And there is no special interest behind me or behind this campaign. Also, the other question that I keep getting, or criticism I get on my channel these days, is that some people have said, oh, you're changing your tune, you were very optimistic before and apparently you sound different. I'm still optimistic. I'm still saying we are going to be leaving the European Union, one way or another. Do or die, come what may, we will be leaving the European Union, and just depending on how we do it, and if we do it before October or on the actual 31st of October, we'll see how that goes. But we have now prepared a new thing. Obviously, as some of you have seen over the last couple of days, we have now launched our merchandise site where you could actually get Brexit t-shirts and other stuff like mugs and phone cases. But today I have a new announcement. In light of the Supreme Court verdict and the establishment stitch-up, we have also created a new product, People versus Parliament. We now have t-shirts, mugs and phone cases and other things that's going to come soon. We are probably going to be needing these if we're going to have a Brexit rally, so make sure you get your t-shirts and prepare for a Brexit rally. As always, we're going to be obviously covering all this on a daily basis, so don't forget to subscribe and click on a notification bell next to it, otherwise you won't get notified when I release a new video. Videos come out every night at 5:45 p.m. I've been told to do it before 6 p.m. because Nigel Farage has his show on LBC. So also, if you want to follow me on social media, Twitter and Instagram, you can find them down here. As always, I'm Tousi, and this is the fastest growing centre-right Brexit channel in the country.